Okay, this is our final installments for identity. Chapter 11, Gethsemane, surrender under pressure. With the key idea, identity must endure fear without losing relationship. As the gospel story approaches the cross, the pressure on Jesus reaches its most personal and emotional point. After the Last Supper, he walks with his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. Until this moment, Jesus has faced opposition, criticism, and rejection, but now he confronts the full reality of what lies ahead. Betrayal, arrest, humiliation, and crucifixion are no longer distant possibilities. They are only hours away. In the garden, Jesus speaks openly about the weight of what he feels. He tells his disciples, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death." Matthew 26:38. These words reveal something deeply human. The one who carried calm authority before crowds now experiences intense emotional distress. The gospel does not hide this moment. Instead, it shows that fear and anguish are real even in the life of the Son. This is why the key idea says that identity must endure fear without losing relationship. Emotional distress does not mean that identity has failed. Fear does not cancel belonging. What matters is whether the relationship that forms identity remains intact during that fear. In the middle of this anguish, Jesus turns toward the Father in prayer. He says, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Matthew 26:39. These words show both honesty and trust. Jesus does not pretend the suffering ahead is easy. He openly expresses his desire for relief. Yet at the same time, he remains aligned with the Father's will. The important detail is the first word of his prayer, Father. Even in distress, the relationship does not change. The one who declared, "This is my beloved Son," at the Jordan remains the one Jesus turns to in his moment of fear. Identity remains rooted in relationship even while emotions are overwhelmed. 3 times he returns to pray. Each time the orientation of his heart remains the same: trust in the Father's will. The emotional struggle is real, but it does not separate him from the one who anchors his identity. This stage of the journey shows that true stability does not require the absence of fear. Instead, it means that fear does not sever the bond that defines identity. A person can feel distress and remain aligned with the source of life. By the time the soldiers arrive to arrest him, something important has already happened internally. The struggle has been processed in prayer. The decision to remain faithful has been made within the relationship between the Son and the Father. When Peter reacts impulsively and draws a sword, Jesus stops him and says, "Put your sword in its place." Matthew 26:52. The panic that could have led to violence has already been surrendered. Gethsemane therefore reveals a critical stage in the formation of identity. Fear is not denied, but it does not control the outcome. Relationship remains stronger than distress. Identity endures not because emotions disappear, but because trust remains anchored in the Father, even in the darkest moment. Things to consider. Take a moment to reflect on how you respond when you feel overwhelmed. Fear can show up in many forms. Anxiety about the future, pressure from responsibility, uncertainty about outcomes, or emotional weight that feels too heavy to carry. When this happens, what is your instinctive response? In Gethsemane, Jesus does something different. He does not deny his distress. He does not pretend the situation is easy. Instead, he speaks honestly. If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. This shows that expressing fear is not failure. It is part of being human. But what makes this moment different is what follows. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Even in fear, the relationship remains intact. He stays connected. This is the difference between being overwhelmed and being grounded. Fear is present, but it does not break alignment. And from the Edgar Casey readings, for fear is that influence that opposes will, and yet fear is only of the moment, while will is of eternity. Hence fear takes hold upon the emotions, while will is deeper seated into the soul, into the warp and woof of the very being of an entity in its entirety, finding expression to be sure in the lowest of the emotions, yet is prompted by the creative force itself. Reading 12:10:1. And fear is that element in the character and in the experience of individuals which brings about more of trouble than any other influence in the experience of an entity. For when ye are sure of the right path and follow it, ye do not fear. Hence, when the entity was sure, it went about or became the channel rather to magnify the truth in the land with a purpose that was not prompted by egotism nor selfishness. 12:10-1. And that's the end of chapter 11, Gethsemane, surrender under pressure. Okay, chapter 12, the cross, identity under maximum pressure. With the key idea, identity must survive humiliation and apparent defeat. When the story of Jesus reaches the cross, the pressure on identity reaches its absolute peak. Earlier stages of the gospel narrative tested identity through hunger in the wilderness, through rejection by critics, and through fear in the Garden of Gethsemane. But the cross introduces something even more difficult: maximum contradiction. Everything that once seemed to confirm Jesus' identity now appears to deny it. At the beginning of his public life, the Father had spoken clearly at the Jordan River. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Matthew 3:17. That declaration established the foundation of Jesus' identity. Yet at the cross, the crowd shouts something very different. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. Matthew 27:40. The same phrase that appeared earlier in the wilderness returns again. If you are. This moment reveals the deepest challenge identity can face. When humiliation and apparent defeat appear, the human mind begins to reinterpret earlier promises. If identity depends on visible success, then suffering will immediately call that identity into question. If belonging depends on victory, then failure will seem like proof that belonging was never real. At the cross, Jesus experiences public humiliation on every level. The crowds mock him, soldiers ridicule him, religious leaders challenge his trust in God. Even the criminals crucified beside him join in the insults. Matthew records the taunts clearly. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now if he will have him. Matthew 27:43. In other words, if God truly delights in you, why are you suffering like this? From a visible perspective, everything appears reversed. The one who healed others now hangs wounded. The one who calmed storms does not calm this one. The one who raised the dead does not rescue himself. Power appears absent. Honour appears replaced by shame. Victory appears replaced by defeat. This is why the key idea says that identity must survive humiliation and apparent defeat. If identity depends on circumstances going well, it cannot survive moments like this. Suffering will seem like proof that identity has failed. Yet Jesus does not abandon the relationship that defined him. Even in his cry from the cross, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. These words express deep anguish, yet they still contain the language of relationship. Jesus does not say God, but my God. Even in the moment of maximum contradiction, the connection remains. The final words recorded in Luke's Gospel reveal this even more clearly. As death approaches, Jesus says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Luke 23:46. The story ends with the same relational trust that began at the Jordan. The Son entrusts himself to the Father, even when everything visible seems to deny that relationship. This stage of the Gospel story reveals something essential about identity formation. True identity is not proven by success, applause, or visible victory. It is revealed when a person remains aligned with the truth of who they are, even when circumstances appear to contradict it. The cross, therefore, represents the deepest test of identity. Public humiliation cannot erase it. Apparent defeat cannot cancel it. The declaration spoken at the Jordan remains true even when the world believes the story has ended in failure. Only after identity survives this level of contradiction can resurrection reveal its final vindication. Things to consider. Take a moment to reflect on how you experience contradiction in your own life. There are moments when what you believe to be true no longer seems to match what you are experiencing. You may feel like you are doing the right thing, yet outcomes do not reflect it. You may feel called or clear about something, yet everything around you seems to resist it. These moments can feel disorienting because they challenge your sense of identity. Ask yourself, when things do not go as expected, what happens to how I see myself? Do I begin to question my worth, my direction, or what I believe is true? The cross represents the point where identity can no longer depend on external confirmation. There is no visible success, no approval, and no relief from suffering. From the outside, it appears as failure. This is what makes it such a powerful stage in formation. It reveals whether identity is grounded deeply enough to remain true even when circumstances seem to contradict it. Consider where this pattern appears in your own life. Is there an area where outcomes do not match your expectations? where effort does not seem to produce results, where things feel unresolved or misunderstood. And from the Edgar Casey readings. The central theme, the basis of each individual's approach, be not what is my cross, which is the usual first question in every material mind, but rather, how may I, with his aid, best meet my cross in my approach to the crown of righteousness, and not as of a temporal or even a mental kingdom, but the cross of glory, the crown of glory in, through and by his name. 262-34. As was given in him, that the awakening may be done by the words and the acts of individuals. The increase, the understanding, is God's work. Expect not that to be thine work, but bringing the opportunities, the awakening, the light, the knowledge, and God gives the increase. For those that are called, those did he predestine. 262-11. And that's the end of chapter 12, the cross, identity under maximum pressure. Okay. Chapter 13, silence in the tomb, with the key idea, identity must endure silence and waiting. After the cross, the gospel story does not move immediately into triumph. Instead, it enters a quiet and often overlooked stage. Jesus is buried in a tomb. The stone is rolled across the entrance. Guards are posted. The body is wrapped in linen and laid in stillness. From every visible perspective, the movement that once gathered crowds and stirred hope appears to have come to an end. This moment is described simply in Scripture. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his new tomb. And he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb. Matthew 27:59-60. The narrative becomes quiet and slow. The voice that taught with authority is silent. The hands that healed the sick no longer move. The disciples scatter in confusion and fear. Nothing appears to be happening. This is why the key idea says that identity must endure silence and waiting. Up to this point, the life of Jesus has contained action, teaching, healing, confronting opposition, and enduring suffering. Even the cross, though painful, was a visible event filled with movement and conflict. But the tomb introduces a different kind of pressure, stillness. Silence can be deeply unsettling. When nothing moves and nothing changes, the mind often begins to question what once seemed certain. If identity depends on visible progress or ongoing activity, silence can feel like abandonment. Waiting can feel like failure. When the story appears paused, doubt begins to whisper that perhaps the earlier promise was misunderstood. For the disciples, the declaration spoken of the Jordan must now seem very distant. Only days earlier they heard crowds cheering and witnessed miracles. Now their teacher lies in a sealed tomb. The one they believed to be the Messiah appears defeated and gone. From their perspective, the story is over. Yet the silence of the tomb does not cancel the declaration spoken at the beginning. The Father's words, "This is my beloved Son," are not dependent on visible activity to remain true. Sonship does not expire in stillness. Being beloved is not revoked because the story appears paused. This stage reveals something essential about identity formation. Many people feel certain about who they are when life is active and moving forward. Success, affirmation, and momentum reinforce their sense of purpose. But when progress stops and life enters a season of waiting, identity can begin to feel unstable. Silence tests whether identity depends on constant reinforcement. The tomb shows that identity can remain intact even when nothing outward confirms it. Hiddenness does not erase belonging. Waiting does not undo what was spoken by God. In fact, the stillness of the tomb prepares the ground for what comes next. Only when identity has survived the cross and endured silence can resurrection reveal its full meaning. If identity depended on visible movement, the waiting would have shattered it. But the declaration spoken at the Jordan still stands, even in the quiet darkness of the grave. The beloved Son remains the Son, even in hiddenness. Things to consider. Take a moment to reflect on how you experience stillness in your own life. There are seasons where things are active, clear, and moving forward. And then there are moments where everything slows down or stops. Progress becomes unclear, direction feels uncertain, and there is no visible sign that anything is changing. These moments can feel unsettling because the mind often equates movement with meaning. When nothing seems to be happening, it can feel like something is wrong. Ask yourself, how do I respond when life becomes quiet or uncertain? Do I become anxious, restless, or discouraged? Do I try to force movement or create activity to avoid the discomfort of waiting? The tomb represents this in-between space. It is the place between what has already happened and what has not yet been revealed. From the outside, it looks like the end, but internally, something is still holding. This is what makes this stage so important. It reveals whether identity is dependent on visible activity or whether it remains steady even when nothing can be seen. From the Edgar Casey readings. As we give out, so does the whole of man, physically and mentally, become depleted. Yet in entering into the silence in meditation, with a clean hand, a clean body, a clean mind, we may receive that strength and power that fits each individual, each soul for a greater activity in this material world. 281-13. Question, pituitary, silence? Answer, silence, golden, the forces upon which the greater expression has been set of all the influences of might and power as may be seen in man's experience. Silence, if ye would hear the voice of thy Maker. 281-29. And that was chapter 13, Silence in the Tomb.
This is the chapter 14, Resurrection. I can't really read what's going on here. Identity vindicated. So the key idea is identity that survives pressure becomes indestructible. When the gospel story reaches the resurrection, the long journey of identity formation finally becomes clear. Everything that appeared to contradict Jesus' identity has already taken place. The declaration at the Jordan was followed by hunger in the wilderness, rejection from critics, fear in the garden, humiliation at the cross, and silence in the tomb. Every possible form of pressure has been applied. Now the resurrection reveals something profound. None of those pressures destroyed what the Father had spoken at the beginning. The Gospel writers describe the moment with remarkable simplicity. When the women arrive at the tomb, the stone has already been rolled away and the body is gone. An angel tells them, "He is not here, for he is risen, as he said." Matthew 28, verse 6. The emphasis is not on spectacle, but on fulfillment. What Jesus said would happen has happened. This moment reveals the meaning of the key idea: identity that survives pressure becomes indestructible. Earlier in the story, many situations appear to challenge Jesus' identity. In the wilderness, the tempter questioned it directly. "If you are the Son of God," Matthew 4, verse 3. At the cross, the crowd repeated the same challenge. "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." And that's Matthew 27:40. Each stage created a new opportunity for identity to collapse under doubt or contradiction. But Jesus never renegotiated who he was. He remained aligned with the Father through every stage of pressure. The resurrection now shows that the Father's declaration was never undone by suffering, rejection, or death. What was spoken at the Jordan remains true even after the cross. This is why resurrection is better understood as vindication rather than revenge. Jesus does not return to overpower his enemies or prove his critics wrong through domination. Instead, the resurrection quietly confirms that the Son remained faithful to the Father and that the Father remained faithful to the Son. Paul later summarizes this truth when he writes that Jesus was declared to be the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead. That's Romans 1, verse 4. The resurrection does not create Jesus' identity. It reveals that his identity could never be destroyed. The way Jesus appears after the resurrection also reflects this stability. When he meets Mary Magdalene outside the tomb, he speaks her name gently, Mary. That's John 20, verse 16. When he appears to the disciples hiding behind locked doors, his first words are calm and reassuring. "Peace be with you." John 20, verse 19. There is no anger toward those who abandoned him and no dramatic display of power meant to intimidate others. This is the behavior of someone whose identity is already secure. Vindication does not inflate him because nothing within him needs to prove itself anymore. The same steady character that existed before the cross remains visible after the resurrection. The resurrection therefore marks the completion of the identity journey. The declaration spoken at the Jordan has passed through every possible test. Hunger did not destroy it. Rejection did not rewrite it. Fear did not fracture it. Suffering did not erase it. Silence did not weaken it. Instead, each stage strengthened it. By the time the resurrection appears, identity has become completely stable. It no longer depends on applause, success, or visible outcomes. It has endured the full weight of contradiction and emerged unbroken. That is why resurrection is not only about life returning after death, it is the moment when identity that has survived every form of pressure is revealed to be indestructible. Things to consider. Take a moment to reflect on what this means in your own life. Up to now, each stage has required you to hold identity steady under different forms of pressure. But there comes a point where you begin to see that what you feared would break you did not. Situations that once felt overwhelming have passed and you remain. Challenges that seemed to threaten your sense of self did not ultimately define you. This is not always dramatic or visible, but it is real. Ask yourself, where have I already come through something that I thought might destabilize me? What did I learn about myself through that process? The resurrection reveals that identity is not strengthened by avoiding difficulty, but by enduring it. Each stage has removed dependence on something external: approval, control, comfort, clarity, or activity. What remains is something deeper and more stable. This is why the resurrection does not need to be loud or dramatic. It simply reveals what has already been established. In your own life, this often appears as a quiet realization: I am still standing. What is true about me has not changed. Ed Casey readings. Thus, in the hour of sacrifice, material, mental, and spiritual relationships are attained and considered in his every word. In those periods of transition from it is finished comes that which is to each heart the determination that it too may know the blessed hope that comes in seeing, knowing, experiencing the cross in the heart, the body, the mind. The period of resurrection, here we find that in which you all may glory. For without the fact of his overcoming death, the whole of the experience would have been as naught. Then may ye, as seekers of the way, may ye that have come seeking to know, to experience, to feel that presence of the Christ consciousness within thine own breast, within thine own experience, open the door of thy heart, for he stands ready to enter to those who will bid him enter. Comes not unbidden, but as you seek, you find. As you knock, it is open. As you live the life, is the awareness of his closeness, of his presence, thine. Then again, as he gave, love ye one another, thus fulfilling all that is in the purpose of his entrance into materiality, to replace hate and jealousy and those things that make one afraid with love and hope and joy. I'm reading 5749-10. And that's chapter 14, Identity Vindicated. So chapter 15, Permission without ego. The idea is mature identity gives authority away without needing to protect itself. At the end of the gospel story, something significant changes in the way authority is expressed. Throughout his ministry, Jesus has taught, healed, led, and carried authority in a way that was calm, grounded, and free from insecurity. But in this final stage, he does something even more revealing. Instead of holding on to that authority, he gives it away. He sends his followers out to continue the work he began. This moment shows that identity has reached its highest level of maturity. This is why the key idea says that mature identity gives authority away without needing to protect itself. When identity is still developing, there is often a need to hold on to control, recognition, or position. A person may feel that if they release authority, they will lose significance. Leadership can become protective, guarding influence rather than sharing it. Insecurity tends to gather power inward because it depends on that power to feel stable. But in the life of Jesus, we see a completely different pattern. By the time he reaches this stage, his identity has already passed through every form of pressure. It has been declared at the Jordan, tested in the wilderness, expressed in ministry, challenged through rejection, surrendered in Gethsemane, broken on the cross, and vindicated in the resurrection. Nothing remains that needs to be proven. Nothing needs to be defended. Because of this, Jesus is able to release authority without fear. After the resurrection, he speaks to his followers and says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations." That's Matthew 28, verse 18 to 19. The statement is important. He first acknowledges that all authority has been given to him, but then immediately directs that authority outward. He does not use it to elevate himself above others or to secure his position. Instead, he shares the mission with those who follow him. This reveals the final stage of identity formation. Identity no longer exists only as something that is stable within the person. It becomes something that multiplies beyond the person. Authority is no longer held as possession. It becomes something entrusted to others. The focus shifts from self to continuation. In this stage, leadership changes its form. It is no longer about maintaining control or proving capability. It becomes about empowering others to step into their own identity and responsibility. Jesus does not create dependence in his followers. He prepares them to carry the same mission. He trusts them with responsibility, even knowing their weaknesses and imperfections. This kind of trust is only possible when identity is fully secure. If there were any need to protect his role, to compete for recognition, or to preserve his position, he would not be able to release authority in this way. But because his identity is completely anchored in relationship with the Father, nothing can be taken from him. There is no loss in giving. This stage also reveals something important about the nature of true authority. Authority that comes from insecurity tends to control, limit, and centralize power. It creates dependence and maintains distance. But authority that flows from secure identity does the opposite. It expands outward, it builds others, it multiplies influence rather than containing it. The book of Acts shows the continuation of this pattern. The followers of Jesus begin to teach, heal, and carry the message of the kingdom into new places. The mission grows beyond the original setting of the Gospels. This expansion is the direct result of authority being shared rather than held. In this way, the commission is not just an instruction. It is the final expression of mature identity. The life that began with the words, "This is my beloved Son," now becomes a life that empowers many others to live from that same reality. Identity has moved through every stage of formation. It is no longer being built, it is no longer being tested, it is now being given. This is the completion of the pattern. Mature identity does not protect itself, it reproduces itself. Things to consider. Take a moment to reflect on how you relate to responsibility, influence, or control in your own life. When you have something valuable, whether it is knowledge, ability, position, or influence, what is your instinct? Do you hold on to it tightly, manage it carefully, and feel the need to stay in control? Or are you able to share it freely and trust others with it? These responses often reveal whether identity is still protecting itself. When identity is insecure, it clings. It fears loss of position, relevance, or recognition. It feels the need to stay central in order to feel significant. In contrast, a secure identity does not operate from fear of loss. It is not threatened by others growing, learning, or stepping into responsibility. It does not need to remain in control to feel stable. This is why Jesus, at the height of his authority, does not centralize power around himself. Instead, he sends others. He entrusts the mission to people who are still developing, still imperfect, and still learning. This is not careless. It is confidence rooted in identity. Ask yourself honestly, where in my life do I feel the need to hold on tightly? Where do I struggle to trust others with responsibility or influence? Edgar Casey readings. Please explain. He breathed unto them and saith unto them, "Receive ye the Holy Ghost." And the answer is that change of doubt and fear which arose in the minds and hearts of those gathered in that room For the fear of the interpreting of the phenomenon being experienced, he breathed. As the breath of life was breathed into the body of the man, see, so breathed he that of love and hope into the experience of those who were to become witnesses of him in the material world. And question John 21:25. Does this verse have reference to the beginning as Adam? In the same manner of beginning, yes. So I think that refers to Genesis and Adam. So that's reading 5749-10. So this one, just as in Genesis, when God formed Adam and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul, that's Genesis 2, verse 7. Jesus now breathes spiritual life into his disciples. The first breath gave natural life to humanity. This second breath gave spiritual awakening to those who would carry his message. This is why Casey says, as the breath of life was breathed into the body of the man, so breathed he that of love and hope. The disciples already had physical life. They were alive in body, but now Christ was breathing into them courage, faith, peace, and spiritual authority. Their fear was being replaced by love. Their doubt was being replaced by certainty. Their hiding was being replaced by witness. And that's the end of chapter 15. Commission without ego.